Hi, Peter Charles here, Hooked Fly Fly Fishing. And today in my series in getting started in fly fishing, I thought, why not talk about the flies? I mean, that's really the logical place to start. It is the significant difference between fly fishing and conventional fishing is that we're casting something that has very little weight and is meant to imitate certain things. Now, flies are associated with imitating insects. Now, there are other flies that imitate bait fish, frogs, crayfish, you name it. But when we think of fly fishing, we think of flies that imitate insects, and specifically flies for trout. So that's going to be the subject of this video. We're going to get looking into trout flies and the kinds of trout flies that we use in fly fishing. In subsequent episodes, we'll get into the actual fishing. I've also got videos on YouTube already where I get into some of the fishing aspects as well. So let's start by talking about the quintessential fly for fly fishing, the trout dry fly. Now, a dry fly is meant to sit on the surface of the water. Now, they will sink because it's got a steel hook. So if it gets soaking wet, it will sink under the water. But it's designed to sit on top of the water, and we use floatant to help keep it up and things like that, which we can talk about later. But the whole idea is it sits on the surface of the water and it drifts down with the current. And what it's imitating is the adult stage of an aquatic insect. Now, these insects live in the bottom of the rivers and lakes. They live their life amongst the weeds and the rocks. However, they cannot mate and lay eggs in the water. They have to, what we call hatch, emerge, fly away, and mate in the air, and then lay their eggs back into the water. They have to go through that life cycle. And so we as fly fishers, we have flies that imitate the various stages in this life cycle. And as I say, the dry fly is the fly that imitates that moment when the insect has popped out of the water, emerged as an adult, and now is sitting on the surface of the water before it flies away. And we look to try to imitate that stage and have the trout come up and take the fly. I mean, that's the big thing in fly fishing, to see that trout come up and take the fly. And that's what we're all after. That's what we live for. So a dry fly does that. So let's look at some of the characteristics of a typical dry fly. Now, this is a Hendrickson, and it's really, really battered. I mean, all my flies have been well fished. So this one shows the signs of having a fish or two. It has a tail because, a dry fly like this have tails. It has this stiff hackle, and the purpose of that hackle is to help it sit on the surface of the water, and it also, from the fish's perspective, looks like legs. And because when the adult is sitting on the surface of the water, their legs are dimpling the surface of the water. So that's the purpose of that dry fly hackle. Plus, the adult has wings that stick up, so that's why we have these two wings here. That's why this fly is built in the way it's built. It's meant to imitate something called a mayfly, which, as the name suggests, emerge mostly around May, though they can emerge throughout the summer. I've actually seen certain species of mayflies coming off late into the fall, so you can get them emerging all year round, practically, depending on where you live, but the reality is the vast majority are going to be coming off in the spring. And they're characterized by having tails, these upright wings, and they've got sort of these curved bodies. Now, if you really, really, really want to get into this, if you're really interested in learning about the insects, I have a website for you to go to. I know it's not mine, it's somebody else's. But it's probably the best website on the net that I found that discusses insects, and it's called troutnut.com. And it's all about understanding insects from a trout fishing perspective, which is what we're after. I mean, you don't want to read scientific literature on entomology. I mean, ugh. But, I mean, to read about the insects that we're going to try to imitate, that's valuable. That's valuable information. So anyway, if you're looking at a dry fly for trout, this is what they look like. They've got that stiff hackle, spiky hackle. They've got upright wings, and they have a tail. And the body color and the wing color and the hackle color will vary all over the place. I mean, I've got some in here that are, quite bright in color. Look at these on this side. They're all, let me see if I get this open. They're almost white. So, you've got a broad variety of colors, And that's, meant to imitate the various species that are coming off. Now, you're going to say to yourself, you're sitting there right now and going, how am I going to know what's right? What should I use? What should I buy? Well, that's not that hard. If you look at searching for your rivers, something called hatch charts, and they will tell you the insects that live in your river and are coming off at certain times of the year. So you'll be able to go, Hendricksons come off early May. Okay, fine. I'll go down to the store and buy some Hendricksons. That's how you have to work it. And you also want to only buy the flies that are a big hatch on your river. I mean, it's no point buying flies for a hatch that is sporadic and almost never happens. That's a waste of time. And certainly a waste of time buying a fly for a river on the other side of the continent. So if you're not sure, if you can't find a hatch chart, ask a local fly shop or go online and ask some people in your area, what kind of fly should I be buying for this particular river at this time of year? And they'll help you out with that, because when it comes to mayflies, they're specific for times of the year. And you'll only see Hendricksons at certain periods, in the spring, late April, early May, and depending on where you are. And that's it. You're not going to see them again for the rest of the year. Okay, let's move on to another component of the fly life cycle. And this is called the nymph, and I'll just put one in my vise here. Again, this has been fished, so it's a little bit ragged. Now, this is meant to imitate the insect that's at the bottom, living amongst the rocks. And the vast majority of trout food is those insects living near the bottom. So this is what they eat most of the time. And that's why it's got a bead on the front to help it get down, to help it sink. You want to get it down fast. And you notice it's very, very buggy looking. Well, these insects have legs, they have gills, so they're kind of fluffy looking insects. There's bits sticking out of them all over the place. So that's the purpose for this very buggy looking body. It's not neat. It's got bits sticking out all over the place. And before I fish it, I could pick this out even more, get in here with a brush and pop things out a bit even more than it is. So if you were fishing this fly, you'd have to fish it underneath the water. And it's called nymphing. There's specific techniques for that. And again, I've got videos on those techniques if you want to see how that works. But, the idea is the majority of the trout food is this kind of bug, the bug that lives on the bottom. Now, this is a mayfly nymph. It has like a wing case up here. It has a tail. We have another species that's quite common. It's called caddisflies. And caddisflies are actually, their nymphs look like little worms. So you can see that there's a kind of a little worm type thing. Again, we've got a bead on the front to help get it down. And they live, some of them are free swimming, some of them make nets, some of them crawl around the rocks. They have different, some of them live in cases. But insects eat a lot of caddisflies. And the nice thing about caddisflies, they're available for most of the summer. So you can fish stuff like this all year round and you can catch fish on them. So you're either going to be using something that looks like that or something that looks like this. So it's a mayfly or a caddisfly. Those are your two main species that you're going to use. Now, what's interesting, there's an intermediate stage. They're living on the bottom, they're hatching from the top, but they got to get from the bottom to the top. And that's called emerging. So here's an emerger. It's called a wet fly, but it imitates the emerger. And it imitates a mayfly that is in the process of swimming up to emerge as an adult. And so we see now the wing is flowing back. You've got a fluffy tail. This brown hackle is meant to imitate the legs. And this insect, as I say, you would actively fish this. So the mayfly adult drifts along the surface. The mayfly nymph drifts along the bottom. But this thing you can actively swim. So it's interesting, and I've got a video on how to fish emergers. You can see how this fly actually is being used in that video, and it's actually this very fly, and it caught some fish, so you can actually see that happen. So there are a number of types of emergers. That's one kind. Okay, this is a little soft hackle wet fly. It's quite small. It's meant to imitate caddisflies that are coming to the surface. That soft hackle, it's kind of pushing forward because it's been in the fly box, but that will sweep back. And when that hackle sweeps back, it moves like this in the current, and it looks like the legs of the insect as it swims to the surface, and that's the whole point of that. And these are quite effective flies. You'll catch wet flies. You can catch an awful lot of fish on wet flies. There's also a type of emerger that is meant to be at the surface. It looks like this. So that's a fly that's meant to sit in the surface film, and it imitates an adult, in this case an adult mayfly, that's come to the surface and can't get out of what we call its shuck, its nymphal skin. It can't get out. So it's stuck in the surface film, and it becomes available for trout. So these kinds of emerging patterns are very, very effective for trout, and you'll often find that you'll catch fish on emergers that you won't catch when you won't catch them on the adult, what we call the dun, the adult stage of the insect, the dry fly. So those are 3 types of trout flies. You've got the dry fly that sits on top, you've got the nymph that runs along the bottom, and you've got the emerger or the wet fly that goes from the bottom to the top when they're hatching off. So when you go to store, you have to know the insects that live in your river, and you have to know when they hatch. If you want to fish dry flies. If you want to fish nymphs, you can fish the nymphs throughout the year. The only thing there is size. They do grow in size, so at certain times of the year they'll be smaller, and other times of the year they'll be larger. That's a kind of information that you can get from your local fly shop. You might be able to find it online. Hatch charts are useful. The website, troutnut.com, very, very useful website for getting information. There's plenty of books available, too, out there that deal with the life cycles of trout insects. And the other thing I might mention, there's sometimes with the bigger rivers, there's even books specific to that river. Like I fish the Grand River, and I have a book that was written for the insects on the Grand River. So you can, if you can find a book like that, that's invaluable because it tells you everything you need to know about fishing for trout using insect-type patterns on that particular river. So the information is out there, if you want to go look for it. And you can find information about your area, the types of insects you want to fish. And typically you're looking for mayflies, caddisflies, and to a lesser extent, stoneflies and something called acronomids. And if you wonder what a acronomid is, well, a mosquito is a acronomid. So that's an aquatic insect as well. And there are lots of different kinds of acronomids, and they're often quite small, very associated with fishing in lakes, but they're also available in rivers too. And I've got plenty of trout on acronomid patterns. So there are those 4 basic types. There's also other species that live in the water called scuds and shrimp, freshwater shrimp. You can use those as well. Same idea. So that information is out there. Go check it out. I mean, it's easy to find. Just as I say, look for your local area, hatch charts, mayflies, caddisflies. Do that kind of online search, and it'll pop up, and you'll see what size of fly you need and what color of a fly you need to get the job done. And once you've got that once you've got that nailed down tight, you're on your way. You can go fishing for trout. So there you go. Have at it. Cheers.